I'm Ken Phelan. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Gotham Technology Group. And this is an ongoing series of conversations we have about interesting things in the industry. This morning, we have with us Jason Georgi, who is one of the field CTOs for Palo Alto, because we're getting a lot of questions about SASE and what that means to people and how that all works. And Jason is our expert of the day. Good morning, Jason.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I am doing well.
Good.
I was trying to think yesterday. We had a quick talk yesterday, and I was like, I know this guy. I'm sure we must have been in a meeting at some point somewhere. So I was like, maybe just have one of those faces that this looks familiar. I don't know. I think the older I get, I think I've met everybody.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
You don't know. So maybe you could do a quick introduction of yourself, how you got to this place, where what your role at Palo is. That'd be good.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate it. So yeah, I'm the field CTO for SASE here at Palo. Been here for 3 years now. And before joining Palo, I was at a competitive solution. So full transparency for everybody. It's going to be part of the talk. Zscaler. I was there for 4 years running their business consulting practice. But then before that, I spent the first 20 years of my career on the IT side of the table. And most recently, I ran global shared network services for GE at their corporate entity, to where we were really an internal service provider for the business units. And with that, my organization was responsible for really self-disruption and transforming our network and network security to get ready for cloud and mobility, which were business drivers. They were doing that for global growth expansion and emerging markets and things like that. From a physical market perspective. So it was really interesting. And that journey started for us about 10 years ago. So there was no such thing as a SASE at the time. But if there were, it would have made my life a lot easier. But I learned a lot, right? And in terms of what drives business to need to do things with cloud adopted, security and networking capabilities and things like that. So just became a natural fit. So now I get to talk to, really customers all day around their cybersecurity strategy, what they're trying to do, and really how we can align to it, and maybe even help chart a better path to their success.
That's terrific. So, I mean, just to get started, I think, to me, I find that sort of techno marketing terms confusing and sort of fluid. So, I mean, maybe you could sort of just, even before we start talking about specifically about the SASE solutions, like what does SASE mean from your perspective? Like where's it coming from? Where's it going to? And how do you define SASE? Let's start there.
Sure. That's a good question. And, so Gartner coined the term in August of 2019. And, a lot of people have a love-hate with Gartner for sure, but I think they got this one right. And the reason for it is the same reason we went down the path of delivering our cloud delivered capability the way we did, which was you have users that are working anywhere. It doesn't matter if they're at home, on the go, or in the branch, and they just need to access their resources, whether those resources are in a data center or data centers, cloud VPCs, multi-cloud environments, SaaS or web. We just need to get them there. So converging networking to get them to their destination and security to get them there as securely as possible is just a natural evolution of network security, right? Rather than the old castle and moat approach or, wide area networks that hub and spoke into a data center and then out, where we're creating backhaul scenarios, both for branches and or remote workers that are on VPNs that have concentrators sitting in the data center. It's a less efficient path. Cloud adoption, SaaS adoption is accelerating. So with that, user experience is impacted. So SASE is just a really good way to get users wherever they're working to any destination as efficiently as possible with security embedded in that path.
Yeah, I think I always use this analogy. I'm like, we blew up both sides, right? It's like double-ended diaspora, right? Of like, the users are now everywhere instead of being in the office. And instead of going to a data center, they are now going everywhere, right? So we exploded both ends of this. In the center, hopefully there's this spot where we can, create some rationality and make sure we're making the right decisions.
Well, and one of the things I've been saying to my clients lately is, look, work is an activity, not a place. If we use that as a grounding kind of mantra, right, for what we need to do moving forward, it makes things clearer, right? We no longer have the guardrails of something physical that a user's attaching to from a network perspective. They're not badging into an office, as much with the hybrid approach they are, but they're not always badging into an office. They're not always attaching to an authenticated wireless access point or sitting behind a NAC when they're attaching to the local area network. So when those guardrails, those first physicals are removed from our environment, How do we go about keeping our users and our data safe? So, we just need to approach it that way.
Yeah, I think it's a good evolution too, from just like we've spent a lot of time at Gotham working with, we had this thing, secure application delivery as a function, back through the late 90s. You guys just, Ron, can you just mute?
I don't even know, did we give permissions unlock and unlock?
Anyway, maybe, okay. Anyway, so, but people have been doing remote compute as a part of their world for a long time. I'm sure you're doing it at GE. Figure out how somebody can get from some place into sort of your environment, and sell VPNs and structures and things and VDIs and all these different perspectives. But with the services being all over the cloud, that functionality should move out to the cloud, right? Like, you don't want to gateway them into your org. You want to keep that gateway out there and maybe do something more intelligent. So I guess, in the time frame it took to schedule this, like, I feel like on some level, the sort of the SASE story has been sort of overtaken marketing wise by the ZTNA story.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me what ZTNA is. Tell me how SASE and ZTNA are different. Can you do that
sure.
for me?
Yeah, it's funny because they almost seem to be interchangeable at this point. But no, ZTNA is part of SASE. So if we're talking about that access piece, right, boiling it back down to as simple as possible, users, resources. Well, you've got internet and SaaS resources that are usually part of whatever the secure web gateway capability is, right? That's how those users are getting there, with some security built in and things like that. On a data center and VPC or IaaS side, that is a traditional VPN access method. ZTNA is meant to take a new approach to VPN. So the 5 core capabilities of SASE include SD-WAN, Zero Trust Network Access, Cloud SWG, Firewall as a Service, and CASB. So ZTNA is really meant to be a new way of approaching remote access in a secure way, right? So identity-based access to applications, removing implicit trust, so no unauthorized access to an application or service. The principle of least privilege is applied. So it's a core part of what SASE does. Now, SASE is a good way to execute a zero trust network architecture, right? Because now if your users are attaching to an edge that is off-prem from you, they're attaching their policies applied at the edge, security controls of that traffic are applied at the edge. So then only clean scrub traffic is going from that termination point to the destination. So there's no threats or malware or anything making it even to your data center or to your cloud VPC or things like that. So zero trust is just a nice way or SASE is a nice way to enforce what you're trying to do with your zero trust strategy by having that as a core component of it.
Right. So you kind of ran through this quickly, and I want to dig into it more because I think customers are sort of, we're like, these are the 5 things it is. I'm like, what? Like, let's get into that a little more, because I think one of the challenges is, as we all as an industry start to wrap our heads around what is SASE, what is there, what are these elements, it becomes clear that that's going to subsume a lot of elements of what today are granular parts of our story, right? You talked about CAS, we talked about so like, what specifically are those elements that are like, and I think that's part of the rush on the manufacturer side to get into this space and claim to be a SASE vendor. Because if I'm selling SSL VPNs, like, I'm, oh my God, I better sell SASE or I'm going to be out of business. Right. So like, what are all those components and how do they sort of stack up in terms of importance?
Sure. So, and you're right. Those that even have 1 or 2 of those components are raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm SASE too. But really, if we're going to follow the Gartner model, let's give them the credit they deserve for creating the market. The 5 core are the SD-WAN components. So that's the networking side, get users from the branch to their destination. But then on the security side, it is Zero Trust Network Access, Firewall as a Service. Now, Firewall as a Service is meant to, if you are sending branch traffic to any destination really, but instead of having a local branch firewall, you want a cloud delivered, right? You can get the full layer 7 security stack from the cloud. So as your SD-WAN attaches or is deciding which path to take for this data, do I send it direct to the destination because it's low risk or there's a performance issue, whatever else, but there's another piece of this traffic that is higher risk or we have a fear of some malware in there. Let's send that to the security cloud for inspection. firewall as a service, happens there. But it's also a way to then, if it's a true firewall, apply layer 7, security controls to traffic. So if, let's just say, web proxies are lacking, they see parts of traffic, not everything. So Cloud Swig is part of SASE as well. But how do you define that swig? If you can add a firewall element to that swig, now you're protecting across more ports and protocols for even your internet traffic. So we kind of look at it, and you can too, but so you get the traffic to the security cloud one way or another. If your kind of foundational element is a firewall, now you're doing full layer 7 inspection. Now what's taking it from there? It's going to data center or cloud. Cool. That's the ZTNA approach. So that's where, you were doing identity-based access to the application, doing, content inspection of that app traffic, and then session behavior monitoring. So if things start to go awry, we can do something about it. But then the traffic that's meant to go to the internet or SaaS is going to continue on your typical CASB function with URL filtering, content filtering and all of that stuff for web destinations. And then the CASB, inline inspection of SaaS traffic, plus APIs for looking and protecting traffic out of band. So those are really the core components from the network and security side. Now what we've added here at Palo, which I think is important, right? So like I just said earlier, if work's an activity, not a place. And all the things I was talking about from attaching to a local area network that's got maybe some initial protections built in. Well, let's look at the app delivery path as well. Users that are sitting at home accessing a cloud or a SaaS or even a data center resource, what is your path visibility if they're not attaching to a VPN concentrator in the data center? There really isn't any. So one core capability we added on top of all of this is a digital experience management overlay. And any SASE that doesn't have this is doing the customer a disservice, because if users are at home accessing off-prem resources, how are you getting full path visibility segment by segment to where when something does go wrong, and this is tech, something's going to go wrong, you can quickly identify it, triage it, and mitigate further risk to user experience for the rest of your user population. So get them there securely, and look at the full path while they're there.
Yeah. And to some extent, this is like a standard sort of conversation about platform versus that, I guess, all these different elements, in the sense that all these things you're talking about are all big problems, right? Like the CASB problem by itself is a big problem, because to your point, you kind of, I think the different maturity levels of CASB have to do with the integrations with the SaaS products individually, like the API awareness, how they operate, what they do, that structure. And as you talk to CASB vendors in general, it's about which SaaS products you're picking. I mean, do you think that's an important thing to think about for customers, like which SaaS products map to the strengths, or is that? I just find that to be same with like proxies and some of these other things. It's really about integrations that are the problem. I mean, how do you stay in front of all that?
Yeah. I think, well, look, I think SaaS as a general theme is becoming harder and harder to do something about from a security perspective for a few reasons. One, certificate pinning. So if they're using a private cert, you can't as a customer organization be a man in the middle, right? So you can't inspect any of that traffic for threats. And let's be honest, when the promise of everything was a browser and a Chromebook back about 8 years ago, some of these legacy CASB architectures and proxies were just fine, because okay, everything's going to be riding over HTTPS. We can decrypt and inspect anything within that. All these technologies are meant to do that. But now, if we've got the situation where we have what amounts to the old school fat client running on our mobile devices or our endpoints that are building a tunnel to this SaaS server, all by itself with a private cert that we can't man in the middle of it, there's a lot of risk that comes with that. So that's where the API integration then becomes more and more important. And that's why if you don't have a good CASB vendor that has a better set of open APIs or better set of API integrations, like over 20, you're stuck, because there are hundreds of SaaS apps, right? And nobody's going to have an integration for all of them. So you need to figure out a way to protect what you can with the most you can. Because SaaS has exploded as a result of the pandemic too. No different than the original iteration of Shadow IT, where it wasn't really malice, right? It was just, hey, I got a job to do. IT's not giving me an app to make this work for me, right? Or I'm collaborating with a third party over here and we have no product that does that. Cool, let's download something and let's work together. It was more a way to, you know, kind of spur productivity than to be a malicious end user. Well, you know, I think the pandemic started that again, right? Where people are at home, the IT apps are slow, or they're doing new collaborations with different people now. And hey, what IT has provided just isn't working for me as a sanctioned app. I need to find something else that will. And so now we have to account for that. So a good CASB, is going to have a lot of API integrations. It's going to have the ability to do machine learning based app identification. So user goes somewhere, okay? And this is the benefit of seeing stuff inline. If you do, you know, if your SASE has that inline approach, user's going to go access something. Okay, we have no idea what that is yet. Brand new app, it's not identified from, you know, a tech Applepedia perspective. Cool, machine learning is going to say, oh, we saw an authentication attempt. We saw this attempt. We saw this actually happen. That is an application. We're going to identify that. And then you know, alert somebody. You can then go back in and, you know, customize that app or, you know, put a label on it. And then what is that behavior you want from there? Are you going to block it? Because, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. Or are we going to tolerate it because certain users might actually need it to do their job? Or are we going to sanction it? Because what's good for this group is probably going to be good for multiple. Let's get it part of our SSO and all that stuff as well. So, you know, it really, you know, SaaS is a long answer, but SaaS has become such an incredible beast that we're all trying to deal with right now. And it's really hard to get our hands around it for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, at some level, certain like highly secured, like some of my financial customers, those guys, like I don't know how you get away without having sort of hosted browsing as part of your SASE structure, like to get the kind of security you want. And you lose a lot of experience elements when you do that. But I mean, do you think that's the way we're going to head with this? Is more hosted browsing or?
You know, when it comes to internet security, I would say, and this is Jason, a non-Palo response. This is my take on it. I think a strong CASB and a scalable browser isolation capability is the future of internet security. Because yes, off-device rendering is important and it solves a lot of problems in a lot of ways. It also prevents people from being able to upload malicious code to a website. So if you actually could use this to, you know, front end certain things in your own organization from an intranet perspective, somebody gets into your environment, they can't start updating your internal intranet sites and posting malware to them and things like that. So it keeps things from spreading at all. It's more of a zero trust browsing situation. We here at Palo, we have integrations with 4 of the key RBI vendors. We have not decided whether or not we were going to do that ourselves, because we've also gone down the path of machine learning based threat prevention and machine learning based URL categorization and filtering. So a lot of the risk that comes with, you know, rendering in a site on device has been mitigated with our native tools. But we do have the integrations for those use cases, because we do see it popping up. Okay, we got the ELT or the VIP staff of the company, right? They're the targets of every spear phishing campaign that comes across. Let's just send all of their traffic to this and only them. And that's a good use case, excuse me. Or here, the uncategorized sites, let's just send those over and stuff like that. And that works. Their ability to scale will be the determining factor of how successful it is. It's a great idea. I've blogged about it. I think it has a lot of benefit to it, but you know, they're going to need to scale to handle millions of concurrent users. Because you look at a provider like us, right? We've got millions of users on our platform. We want to send all of that to this isolation capability rather than the SWG itself. Better be able to render a lot of pages real fast, because to your point, it's a user experience problem. So now we're back in that old equation of security, user experience. Which one do we do? And some may decide to err on the side of security. It remains to be seen.
Yeah, to me, the historical analogy for most of my customers, I would say, is think about when we were pure VPN, and the concept that we were just going to VPN from the from other desktops or laptops, whatever, and how everybody eventually decided like that they needed to do VDI to deliver that kind of thing in a secure way. It certainly is expensive, you know, to have extra compute and all that compute. but it was a worthwhile endeavor, and certainly hosted browser is not as expensive as popping up full Windows machines virtually. So I think it's a worthwhile investment.
Not even close.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. So I guess maybe just
to that point, real quick, Ken, if I can jump in on that, because that raises a good point. So we've had, defense contractors, we've had highly sensitive manufacturers of certain products, really kind of come to us and say, we've had this legacy architecture just like that. We use VDI for third parties, contractors, or even some employees to attach these resources because we need this image to self-destruct once a session's over. Like, we can't have the ability to store data anywhere. And so but that's very expensive to do, right? It's cumbersome, it's resource intensive, requires constant upkeep and intervention when things go wrong, at the various layers of that architecture. So this is why certain, and if we're going to go back into zero trust, I don't know, but real quick on it, your zero trust approach has to do more than just attach a user to a resource by identity. It has to include things like inline threat prevention and things like DLP inline, because that gives you the ability then to provide that granular least privileged access to an application or a service by identity, but then also assume breach. Right. So if I can assume those credentials are going to be stolen or abused by an insider threat or a rogue insider, then I have an inline mitigating capability that's going to prevent certain malicious activity from happening. So if we can execute that at that point of attachment, at that cloud edge, then we can de-risk a lot of what was going into why those architectures were put into place in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult, and we're kind of beating this same drum again and again about all the different elements, how they stack, how they're important, and also this concept of every manufacturer rushing to the space with kind of their heritage strengths and trying to either partner, build, like kind of roll around it. I mean, so I guess I always make 2 points to the customer. One is like, if you're going to assume everything's going to happen here, you kind of want somebody who can bring all the elements to the table. But I mean, like from your perspective, like it's sort of a crawl, walk, run thing, right? Like where do you start? What are the critical elements? Because customers on the phone here, like what should they be focused on to start with? And how do they kind of grow into it? Because they're not going to like go magically to this endpoint. Like where do you start here to kind of get this functionality going?
It's a lot. There's a lot that it can do in terms of use cases, right? For sure. And so it is not a boil the ocean approach. It is meant to be modular. So what is the compelling event that you have today? Your remote worker access is not secure and not scalable. Okay, I need to do something about VPN replacement, or my internet gateway security is up for renewal or refresh. What do I do about that? Is there a more secure option than what I've been doing to date? I need a CASB. I don't have one yet. I need to start, risk profiling applications for compliance purposes, or I need to get my branches more optimized for cloud traffic. Right? I'm still on hub and spoke with MPLS, and it's not only expensive, but the pathing isn't great. And by the way, the offices only have 20% of the people, 20% of the time. Do I really need to pay for this private line connectivity? So it always starts with, what is the compelling event that you have today? What is something that you need to solve? You start with that. You either replace or augment the capability you have with a SASE capability. Now, if it's a full platform like Palo's, you can start with that and then let the other use cases as they mature fold into it. Right. So, okay, let's just say because of the pandemic and everything else, people are out of reactive mode. Now they're trying to improve their environment. VPN replacement. Cool. We're going to use Prisma Access to do ZTNA for our remote workers. Now you have Prisma Access. So now in a year, when your SWIGs are up for renewal or refresh, you turn them off and you allow Prisma Access to send that traffic to, you do URL filtering and threat prevention on and send it to the internet. Oh, my CASB is about to be renewed. It only supports 10 API integrations. It doesn't do a very good job with threat prevention. I need something else. Cool. Well, you already have Prisma Access for this. Now go ahead and shut your old one off, turn on the policy for SaaS security. So it's things like that you kind of start with. If it's the right platform, you can start with it. and then let these use cases fold into it over time. And so and it is meant to be a really wholly consumed capability, both not just my perspective, but Gartner's too, mainly because if we're just talking about access, right? How did we open the call? It's access. And
Right.
if we're just trying to simplify the environment in terms of policy management and orchestration, tool overhead, managing as many point products as we have for a long time, because there were no such thing as a platform. If we can do better at that, it allows us to focus on other things in the environment. So consolidating those things down is a huge play for a lot of organizations. I'd say 60% of the customers I talk to are looking to say, yeah, I've got all these point products. I need to rationalize these tools and bring them in, right? And if now I can do that with one policy. So that's the other piece. A lot of the SASEs out there wind up having multiple data planes for each of those components. They have a ZTNA product, which is a software-defined perimeter. They have a proxy product. They have some type of CASB integration with their proxy, but a separate CASB, each with their own interface, each with their own user database, so no user rationalization. So they have 3 policies for access and then 3 sets of security controls. When I said before, works and activity not a place, the biggest enemy we have to a successful cyber strategy today is inconsistency. That's what drives users to try to bypass security or do other things. So if we can now just bring those things together, that's why we have a single data plane approach. So Prisma Access is a single data plane that solves a problem. It's not a ZTNA product. It solves a problem of ZTNA. It solves a problem of internet security. It solves a problem of internet or inline CASB. And then it solves a problem of branch firewall delivered, from SD-WAN forwarded traffic. So it's how you consume it is going to, help simplify the environment. But also, yeah, it's not a boil the ocean or a big bang. It is, you start with whatever you need to solve right now, then the platform's there. Then you just use it to absorb these other use cases over time to reach entitlement.
Yeah, I think it's, first of all, on your list of use cases, one of the ones I'm seeing a lot is third-party risk, right? So like people like trying to struggle with third-party risk, struggle with, that whole structure and look at that stuff. But I think, and again, having that starting point is important, but also having that, and not specifically like a whole checkbox. I mean, everyone wants to control this rubric of here are my items and here are my ratings and items, but like, what's that vision look like? Think about 5 years from now, what you want out of your SASE platform. What's going to happen with it? How's it going to affect, like your comment about user experience was great, right? Like, how's it going to work operationally for you? Can you, and I think that's one of the challenges for a lot of these products I see is, you could say, oh yeah, I can make a rule for each user. I can make a rule for each service. I'm like, who's going to make all these rules and who's going to manage all these rules and how are you going to scale all that stuff? And I think it's not operationally feasible to think about another maintenance point in the network where I'm defining which users get which services, right? So conceptually you have that stuff. So I mean, I guess I could ask you specifically from a Palo perspective, like, how do you think that scales? I mean, you have this opportunity to set all these rules, but how are you going to manage? People can't set their rules now. Like, how are you going to manage all the intricacies of context, location, users, allocations? I mean, yes, you can set rules and yes, you can maintain rules are 2 different things. Do you think is there a simple solution for that, or?
Short answer, no.
No.
And it's completely up to the customer environment, right? It's up to the enterprise. What do you need to solve for, right? Because there's a thing is good enough security can be good enough for organizations, right? Hey, I've got some basic checking in place. I can do a device posture check with my XDR or EDR. I'm good. Like, I don't need to do a whole lot else. That's okay. But for organizations that err on the side of security, or they're in certain types of compliance things where they're being asked by their CSO or CISO to align architecture to NIST, right? And say, okay, we do need to stop unauthorized access to applications. We do need least privileged access. You at least want the ability to do it. So you can, when we advise our customers to start down their zero trust journey, it is not identify all your users, every single one of their apps that they access, and build a policy before you even turn this thing on. So once you do, only the right traffic is flowing. It's more of have something that's sitting in line, like a firewall, that sees all traffic, right? I see this user authenticated. they're accessing this application all the time. Cool. I know that that's probably a valid user. We can build a rule around that. I see this happening over here. I can build a rule around that, right? So it gets to, you start very coarse grain in terms of what you're seeing in terms of access, but then you get fine grain as you determine what's real and what's needed by those users or groups roles. So that's the other thing. Start with grouping, right? Here, this group of users has access to this set of applications all the time. Now, of that group now, are any of them contractors that really only need to view that application rather than upload or download to it? Well, we can tighten that down after the fact, right? So it winds up being that. But to your point, this is why what I was saying before with some of these other SASE vendors that have a policy, access and security controls policy for SWIG, access and security control policy for private apps, access and security control policy for SaaS. Oh, and I am going to do some SD-WAN. So I'm going to have a traffic steering policy with that. I mean, you're talking, depending on that SASE provider, 4 different places that you have to manage all of that. That's why we've taken the more unified approach, right? With API integration between SD-WAN and the security cloud itself, where we can do policy-based, things from one interface that are applied downstream. But then from the traffic perspective, one user access policy, no matter what they're trying to access, they hit that cloud edge, there's one user application content inspection policy, user goes off data center, cloud, SaaS, or web, right? So that way, when you build that policy out, it's only one place, one thing to manage. It really helps with that, tool rationalization and management overhead equation. It improves the PPT for sure.
Oh, that's great. I mean, there's sort of like, because again, I've seen people say about things like, I really want somebody born in the cloud. I really want somebody who's this or that, or I want somebody who's, and I think they're like some of like the philosophical inflections, like, do you have an endpoint agent that you want to install? Is it required? I mean, are there sort of philosophical breakpoints that you think people should be thinking about when they're looking at vendors in terms of their perception of what is required in this thing? And when, does that make sense? Or
it does. And so, yeah, when we get the question asked, can I do something without an endpoint agent? Absolutely. There are plenty of clientless options out there. We have one, our competitors have one, but what you're going to miss out on then is the ability to do deep posture checking. Now, the argument to that is, well, I'm running an XDR. Okay. Does it integrate with the other side of the platform? Because cool, you're getting all this behavioral information from the endpoint from your XDR. But you've got to get context somewhere between what that user's doing at the endpoint layer and then what they're doing from a traffic layer. So you're going to log this stuff to a SIM. You're going to try to get a SOAR to orchestrate this, and then get a response pushed to a controller enforcement mechanism, which is likely the security cloud. Cumbersome. Simplify your life. You can remove other endpoint agents if you have one that's doing the remote access capability, right? So the app that's doing the device posture check, plus building the tunnel to the security cloud. And if you want an XDR, that's gravy, right? I mean, I think we should have something also running on the endpoint itself, but theoretically you could get yourself down to 2 agents, and most organizations are running 5 or 6. So
right.
Is 2 better than 6? Yeah, it sure is. So that you gain so much more by running the agent than you do by trying to go clientless from a security posture perspective. And so that's a key part. What was the other thing you mentioned besides the endpoint thing? Oh, the architecture.
Oh, yeah.
Cloud architecture.
Yeah, born in the cloud and all that kind of structure.
So,
I mean, do you need on-prem? Some of them still have on-prem equipment. Like, it's sort of philosophical in nature about like, what do you require, and are you really approaching this in a new way with a new architecture, or are you putting your old stuff in and making it all happen?
Well, what does new mean? I mean, that's what we have to ask ourselves, because again, every organization is completely different. Some are still 80% in data center services, 20% cloud and SaaS adoption. Others are 80% cloud and SaaS, 20% the data center. Some that are brand new companies, they've done everything from the cloud, right? And so you let the use case drive the form factor of how you consume. network security. If you have on-prem use cases for security, use it, right? If you have an IT OT environment where you need physical separation of those networks and threat inspection across VLANs, you can't do that from a cloud. You just can't. So you do need something on-prem. If you've got a crown jewels data center network that is it's not a flat network, it's hierarchical and 2 layers down where you want to do server, host, or application level segmentation locally, you can't do that from the cloud either. So those are things that would require an on-prem deployment. What you want to find is something that can do both of those scenarios, plus your remote worker and branch scenario with a cloud delivered option that all talk to each other, right? Something that's integrated so you can have still maintain that single user to app-based policy and scale it across all of the enterprise traffic flows. So that's incredibly important, especially when we do talk about zero trust, because that's a strategy. It's not a product. Some ZTNA is a product, but zero trust is a strategy, and it comes down to what you need to solve from a problem perspective. But same goes for everything else. And from the cloud architecture, born in the cloud and all this stuff, I just ask you, or I would ask, like I do any customer, okay, what do you need to solve when you move to cloud? Well, typically scale, resiliency, availability, I'm moving this stuff to the cloud because it's a more direct path for my users, right? That are off net, accessing off net or off-prem resources. Okay, cool. So beyond that, am I selling you infrastructure? No, I'm selling you a service. And so if the service does what it needs to do, what do you care? What's under the hood? It's SLA backed. The performance is good. You can test it. You're testing it or using it. What do you care what the actual architecture is? We happen to use public cloud services to deliver Prisma Access because we can do things like full customer isolation. So there's no noisy neighbor condition, right? So you got one customer doing a webinar, another one doing a software push, consuming tons of bandwidth. None of the other customers on the platform or service feel it at all. So we can do things like isolation. We can use the GCP premium fiber network for international users that ingress in the UK accessing data center resources in Chicago. They're going to ride that fiber once, say they attach, security inspection and policies applied, they're across fiber to attach to that resource, right? Things like auto scaling of gateways. So software-based capacity on demand is something that those cloud providers can give us. So we ensure that, regardless of what the, policy enforcement mechanism is, we're meeting the business requirements, because at the end of the day, that's what people care about or should care about. What you shouldn't care about, or what you should also care about, but not get wrapped around the axle with is, what type of box is performing that service. You do want to watch out for those that have you dependent on them adding dozens or hundreds of servers to their data centers every month to account for capacity, because then you are waiting. And if there is a noisy neighbor condition, you're waiting till that gets resolved, right? So software-based cloud architectures are going to avoid or eliminate that problem.
Listen, scale's complicated, right? Because you're right. You kind of don't want to have to keep buying boxes for your own data centers. You want to scale some of the stuff in the cloud. But I also think it's part of this, and I think you kind of said this, but I want to wrap it up in a way of when you start from this remote users or third parties coming in, and there's a certain sort of use case there. You talk about branches. But you also have this, what's the use case construct for the user still sitting in an office? Like they're in your physical offices, obviously the CASB functionality that you're still going to flow through the SASE, but if you're going to be full zero trust, I almost feel like you're saying, if you're going to be full zero trust, you're almost going to run even your data center data, conversation through the SASE platform, right? That's where we're headed, right? So, that seems counterintuitive for a lot of people, but I think, is that a spot you think we're heading towards, or where everything goes through this platform, all the traffic?
It is. It definitely is, because the cloud will eventually become the data center, and that may not be for everything, but eventually our data centers will look more like a simple computer room, right? They'll have a few localized services for those, that really feel, because again, it's an organizational thing, it's a culture thing. Oh, we need this here because that's just the way we've always done it. Okay, cool. I'm not going to fight you on that. Eventually, you're not going to be able to buy software that's not delivered as a SaaS anymore. I mean, that's just the direction software providers are going because they can control the variables, right? You can't call them with a tech support issue because you didn't patch your server. There's no server for you to patch. So things are just going to go that direction. So when you're an on-net user accessing on-net resources, that's also why the endpoint client can continue doing the device posture checking and ensuring your authentication status. The right client's just going to recognize if it's an always on type scenario. Oh, I'm off net. And not only am I going to do the device posture check, but I'm also going to build the tunnel to the security cloud. When I'm on net, it's going to recognize I'm on a private network, the company's private network, and I'm going to continue to do the posture checking. I'm just not going to build a tunnel. So that way, when I try to access something, it's replacing network access control in a lot of ways, because if you build a policy based on user to application, that can be enforced on-prem as well if you're running the client, right? Because now that client is collecting that device information that you want as part of the decision-making process around accessing an application. It's helping forward authentication status to the enforcement point and things like that. So on-net resources are still part of Zero Trust. In some ways, they can be part of SASE, especially, yes, as the data center starts using the cloud gateway as its own egress and ingress gateway. But then over time, it'll be something where you can still apply Zero Trust policy to an on-net user.
Right. And just to make this, not make it even bigger, but the concept of once we're in that space, but like, let's face it, like there's this like golden moment, right, at the any place where you have this decrypted traffic check at a proxy or at the CASB, whatever, to kind of add PCAP, like it's the place where we need everything, forensics, network forensics, all those, like the stack of things that happen. It's the only real packet inspection we're going to get at that point. I mean, is that stuff you think people need to partner with? I mean, do you see all of it kind of collapsing to this whole of like that critical moment? Or
it shouldn't be anything you have to partner with. If the only thing I would say is going to change, or that could change, because we do see it every day, is the question around, like, the only reason I'm saying is because you said it, like packet capture. Yeah. What are you actually trying to solve with packet capture? Deep forensic analysis? Okay. If there's another way to solve that problem natively with the tool, can we solve it without a full PCAP and save both your teams and our cloud resources some time and energy? And if the answer is yes, then we can solve that problem. If you do need full PCAP, then you're going to need to look at a SASE solution that does traffic mirroring. So it can send you a snapshot of it at the same time real user traffic is happening, but now you need somewhere to store that. So what are the means to the ends, and what is the problem you're actually trying to solve? A lot of organizations just traditionally relied on certain things, right? Because this is how they did it. But there are more tools out there now that solve the same problem around forensics and what you're actually looking for from a malware perspective and things like that, just in a different way. So it's about opening up to yourself to new ideas and saying, yep, that's the way I always did it. Is there a better way or a newer way to do it now that still solves what I'm trying to solve for? Because things are changing. Once you do think of cloud being infinite scale and they can store all this stuff. Yeah, but if you start storing all of that stuff for every single customer and every single user session and transaction, I mean, eventually it just becomes too much for you to try to pull down and do your analysis on, unless you've got some type of cloud dashboard that you're working through, which even then is going to take time. So let's solve the problem, not just rely on how we've always done things.
Right. Well, that's one of those things. Network forensics, you get to check early in the conversation, like, do you have a PCAP tattoo? Like, that you need to see everything all the time. I'm like, because that's like a religious thing. Yeah. I must have everything all the time. Well, that's great. I think we're just about the 45 minutes here, so I want to open up. Does anybody have any questions for Jason, or theoretically for me? Is there anybody that wants to talk about anything specific? You can turn on your mics. No, I guess not. Look at that. You answered all the questions. So Jason, what did we not talk about that we should have talked about? Like, from your perspective, I know we had a couple of quick conversations, but do you think there's something we missed in the conversation about how people are working on this? What would be your, if somebody was starting this, what would be your first, like, okay, you're thinking about SASE, top 3 things to worry about? Like what, like think about it, what's top of mind?
If you're looking to solve SaaS, or you're looking at SASE, look across your environment and say, what are the tools that provide access today? You think about remote access. Okay, I've got potentially a combination of a VPN, a VDI, a software-defined perimeter. Okay, what are you solving internet security with? Okay, I've got a web proxy, I've got a layer 7 app gateway, I've got a CASB and some load balancers and firewalls. Okay, I've got secure branch situation happening. So, okay, you've got some flavor of SD-WAN or routing, whatever it is. Maybe you're not at SD-WAN yet, but I've got a branch firewall. I've got this going on. If you look at all those access things, what is going to give you the biggest benefit first, right? So do I need to up-level my security posture? Do I need to simplify my environment? Do I need to try to do both at the same time? Okay, what is causing you the most pain? Approach it in a sensible, practical way based on your organization's needs at the time and what's going to extract the most value for you as you implement something like this. So that's, I would just start with taking a whole look at your access environment, however you're providing access between users, both internal and external, right? Third parties, do you have an extranet that you're bringing all your third party access into that you need to solve for with an inspection zone, right? Or how are you doing that today? Is there a way to abstract that to the cloud edge so that you're creating an air gap, right? And doing that enforcement off-prem. Those are other key components to that organizations can look at to see where their fit is. So just, again, look at what you need to solve for right now, what's bothering your business, what do you need to solve for in terms of complexity or security, and find the right one of those use cases and start with that. And then identify each additional use case that a SASE can solve and start figuring out your roadmap. And a partner like us, will sit down with you and go through this. What is your roadmap to start collapsing these other services into something you've already invested in, right? It's already there, just start using it for more things, extract greater value, consistent security policy and posture, and it's just better off. So that's where you'd start. The things, I think we covered pretty much everything that really is important when it comes to SASE. The one thing I will talk briefly about or hit on one more time is zero trust network access. When organizations go down this path and they say, I need ZTNA, okay, cool. The market is dominated by a particular architecture, and that's fine. The Cloud Security Alliance 6-7 years ago said identity is a new perimeter. The software-defined perimeter was born. It's based on essentially F5 APM-based technology, right? It's identifying user. You have an authentication mechanism. You build a small tunnel, a micro tunnel to an application. Life is fairly good. There's limits around lateral movement once you have capability like that in place. However, understand those are access-only products. There's no security. So like how VPN had no authentication requirement, strong authentication to access an application, or wasn't, granular to pin a user to an application, SDPs go one step further in adding that identity-based access to the application, but that's all it is. It's just access. So if you're looking at ZTNA for high-risk users, external third-party users, any contractors, understand that there's no security inspection in those types of solutions, right? So if in security inspection, threat prevention inline, so intercepting and preventing threats to your private app traffic in your data center or cloud VPCs is important to you, look for a ZTNA solution that includes full inline threat prevention, because most do not. And it's the zero trust, thing. So, right, Gartner good with SASE, Gartner bad by calling a market of products ZTNA, because it's really only partial zero trust. That's the initial connection point. After that, the session's built between the client and the application publisher, and everything's trusted from there. There's no session monitoring behavior. There's no ability to intercept a threat inline because they're not looking at the traffic. So just be aware when you go down your zero trust journey, do you need to do inline threat prevention and mitigation? If the answer is yes, then find the right approach, because a software-defined perimeter is only going to cause you pain eventually.
Yeah, I think and we spend a lot of time on that, honestly, in this whole conversation about You know, it's here, know where you are today. I love that initial inventory. Think about your use case, your point of pain, whatever, but really spend some time thinking about that. What do I need from this 5 years from now? What are the elements I'm going to need to grow into, and make sure I don't take a step in the wrong direction. Like don't head off that way, because that's not going to serve you in the long run, when you know that in the end you're going to need all this traffic inspection structures, allocate, all the rest of those elements. So I think that's good advice.
It's a great point because no, sorry, I was just going to say it's a great point because a lot of these vendors, it's a 3-year deal in most cases, right? And so do you make sure you're not making a 3-year mistake? You may not use all of the technology or security capabilities on the onset, but it's sure nice to know they're there if you do need them, depending on where your use cases might evolve, right?
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's pretty clear that we're going to evolve.
Yeah,
we're going to keep putting more and more things into this bucket of functionality, and we need the right partner platform, whatever. It's going to bring all that stuff to things. And I think obviously everybody in this space needs to grow as well.
Yep.
So you're making a bet on that stuff. One of the conversations I have with customers sometimes, I'm like, well, you're looking at vendor A and vendor B, and you're about to make $1 million decision. I have $1 million in stock in vendor A and $1 million in stock in vendor B. Which one would you take? And they're like, oh, definitely. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't you make that technology decision? Because you're betting on this company to be a player for the next 5 to 10 years.
That's right.
And if they fail, go away, get bought, like all those things, are issues. So making these kind of long-term platform decisions, think about the finances of the company too.
100%.
All right, I think we're kind of wrapping up here. Give one last chance to the audience for any questions. I guess not. Jason, thank you so much for this. This has been very, very helpful. And I learned a lot. I hope everyone else learned a lot too. So
thanks, Ken. Yeah,
thanks for coming out.
having me
It's
on.
been great.
I enjoyed the discussion very much.
Terrific. Have a great day.
You do.
Thanks, everybody.